Anything unusual or surprising happened since you published the book in relation to the book?
Well, I have been pleasantly surprised at the response.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that it's selling well. I think it's also done the work that I'd hoped it would do, which would appeal to the humanities, professors, teachers in the humanities, but also in the sciences.
Uh-huh. So it's being taught in some science classes?
Well, I don't know if it's being taught in science.
Uh-huh.
Well, actually, I heard from the Tallgrass Prairie Center that they might pick it up
Uh-huh.
for some of their classes
Oh,
there,
okay.
which I think would be great.
That'd be good. Yeah.
But I don't know about pure science classes, but I know
Yeah, probably.
I am getting a lot of invitations to talk to science groups.
Oh,
So I talked to the fire ecology group in February, and then just got back from the Iowa Prairie Conference.
mm,
So I'm doing more of that
mm.
than I have in the past, and it's been great to see the response there. I think there was a real hunger for an anthology like this.
Uh-huh. Yeah. I was been surprised at reading the book how many writers' names I recognized
Yeah.
and whatnot. I mean, that was probably my big surprise, you know, Whitman and Dickens. I love the Whitman piece just because
I love it too.
you know he's gone to Lawrence.
To party with the
Party
boys.
with the boys at the university, and he's forgotten to write the poem that he was
Yes.
supposed to write, and he's supposed to give a lecture someplace, but he's probably too drunk
Yeah.
to get to the lecture, and so he just writes this sort of
Yeah.
homage to the prairie. You know?
The speech he would have given if he had given it.
If I hadn't been hungover, this is what I would have said. Yeah, it's just, and he tries to make the best out of it. Maybe he tries to make it sound positive.
Yes.
But you know what's going on there. Yeah, that one just made me laugh. Yeah. But I'm
is
wondering,
great.
what were the real discoveries for you when you were looking for, you know, literature of the Tallgrass Prairie region, or the writers in the book that were real finds?
Yeah, well, Dickens was a find,
right.
I thought. You know, and I had known about it for a while. And then, you know, when I first discovered it, I was amazed. You know, I had forgotten that during his journey, I think it was 1835 or something, like came through here, came through this region. And by the time he got to St. Louis, he was so grumpy. You know, he did not, you know, he was not impressed with prison conditions and slavery.
Right.
So, and he had actually heard a lot about that prairie. Europeans were very interested in prairie literature and descriptions of prairie. So he knew about that
Right.
before he came out. And
Right.
so that was an interesting thing. The literature set him up for an experience that the reality didn't live up to.
Right.
He was out there in, you know, in spring, right?
Right.
Where,
Weren't many flowers. It was muddy.
like
right?
when I was out here in C-SPAN, and you know, she said, "What do you say to people who just come out here and say this is just dead grass? How do you sell this?"
Yeah.
You know, I think he was facing the same kind of thing. But one of the big surprises were discovering women nature writers who, in their time, were very popular, who focused on the prairie, like Margaret Fuller. You know, and I was familiar with that Summer on the Lakes book, but I had forgotten. You know, I'd heard about her pieces of it in grad school, but I'd forgotten about the trip she took out on the prairie and how profoundly impacted she was by
yeah.
that
And
experience.
that's probably not a book that's taught, you know.
No,
Yeah, it's her other, her feminist writing is what gets taught these days rather than that book. I think.
exactly.
Yeah.
And then Eliza Farnham,
Mhm.
the woman who moved out to Central Illinois, had a kind of a troubled childhood.
Mhm.
And then she moved on and became a social reformer in the prisons and so forth. But the descriptions of the prairie storm there, the beauty of the prairie, worked against a preconception I had of some of that earlier literature that it was all going to be negative,
Right, okay. Yeah.
that it was always scary, that it was always terrifying. And there was certainly that dimension to it.
Right.
But there was also some literature that praised the beauty of the tall grass, that were people who were swept away by it spiritually as well
Right,
as,
right.
yeah. That was another kind of interesting surprise. I'd seen it in Hamlin Garland's work, that ambivalence over his participation in the plowing up of that region, but to see it elsewhere too, I had kind of believed that loss was blindly celebrated by most. Certainly brought relative economic prosperity to the region, etc. But people like William Haddock,
Right.
you know, that was a lost gem that professor in my graduate school days handed to me from the Iowa Historical Society, which, by the way, is being threatened with closure because of budget issues. That little book was in there. He discovered it. He knew I was writing about the prairie. Robert Sayer, he gave it to me. He's gone now, unfortunately. But yeah, the grief expressed in that, right? The profound sense of loss. These people witnessed an almost unimaginable loss of life. That had to have an impact on them. So I shouldn't have been surprised that came up.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the number of them that I read was surprising.
Yeah, and maybe it's surprising because we've forgotten that.
Yeah.
You know, the narrative is now all about the success of the project of settlements.
Yeah.
Right.
And we're on the other side of it, and we don't see what's been lost.
We don't see it, yeah.
And that's, you know, one of the other purposes of the anthology, which is to make people aware of. You know, in many ways, the prairie is a literary landscape now. That's all that's left, really, of the prairie wilderness in its original form, is what we have in the literature of witness during that time period. And I think for some people, to be inspired to do something about what remains, you have to experience pain. You have to understand what that loss is about, and go through the necessary steps of grief and so forth. We are a society that has not felt that grief because we don't know what we've lost.
Right. Yeah. We've wiped out the memory of it in a way.
Right. And then you get, as the case was for me, you know, once that gets inside you, once a little bit of wildness establishes itself in that experience, you get hungry for it, you know, and you want more of it. So that leads to hopefully more activism on behalf of some diversity, biodiversity in this area.